The boardroom had never felt colder than the moment Angel Freeman walked through its doors, her heels striking marble like a judge's gavel pronouncing final sentence. Robert Downey sat at the head of the conference table, the same mahogany fortress where he had built his empire for 30 years. His manicured fingers drummed against the polished wood, irritation flickering across his face at being summoned to his own boardroom by someone he had never heard of. The email had been cryptic: new majority shareholder, immediate meeting required, non-negotiable. His lawyers flanked him, their expressions equally puzzled. Angel paused in the doorway, allowing the morning light to silhouette her figure. She was dressed in a black Saint Laurent suit that cost more than most people's cars, her presence commanding attention before she spoke a single word. At 20 years old, she carried herself with the authority of someone who had already conquered worlds. Her eyes, dark and unforgiving, swept across the room before settling on Robert. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying a musical quality that belied the steel underneath. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know you're wondering who I am and why you're here." Robert's lawyer, Harrison Clark, adjusted his glasses nervously. "Miss Freeman, while we appreciate your investment in Downey Industries, a 30% stake hardly grants you the authority to—" 53%, Angel interrupted, sliding a portfolio across the table. "As of 9:47 this morning, when the final shares transferred from your former partners, Everett Lawson and Theodore Blackstone, they were surprisingly eager to sell once I made them offers they couldn't refuse." The blood drained from Robert's face as he snatched the documents, his eyes racing across the legitimately notarized papers. Every signature was authentic, every seal genuine. His empire, 3 decades in the making, had been stolen from under him while he slept. "This is impossible," he breathed, his usual commanding voice reduced to a whisper. "Lawson would never— Theodore and I went to Harvard together. Money has a way of revealing true loyalties, doesn't it, Robert?" Angel moved to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. "You taught me that lesson, actually, 20 years ago." The emphasis on the timeline made Robert's hands still. 20 years ago, he had been 32, riding high on his first major acquisition, married to— No, it couldn't be. Angel turned, and in the morning light, Robert saw it clearly. The same cheekbones, the same proud bearing, the same defiant tilt of the chin that had once captivated him in a crowded bookstore on Madison Avenue. But where Brianna's eyes had held warmth and love, Angel's held nothing but calculated fury. "You don't recognize me," Angel observed, a smile playing at her lips that never reached her eyes. "Why would you? You never knew I existed. But I've known about you my entire life. Robert Matthew Downey, born March 15th, blood type O negative, allergic to shellfish, terrified of being poor because your father lost everything when you were 12. Robert's mouth went dry. Those were details he had shared with only one person, whispered in the darkness of their bedroom when nightmares woke him. "Brianna," he choked out. "My mother," Angel confirmed, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "The woman you married in a courthouse because you said grand gestures were for people who needed to prove their love. The woman you swore to cherish when she had nothing but dreams and determination. The woman you discarded like yesterday's newspaper the moment your rich friends decided she wasn't decorative enough for their parties." The memory crashed over Robert like a wave he had spent 2 decades avoiding. It had been December, snow falling like ash over Manhattan, the Blackstone Winter Gala, where old money gathered to remind each other of their superiority. Brianna had worn the best dress she could afford, a simple black number from a department store, altered by her own skilled hands to fit perfectly. She had been radiant, her natural beauty needing no expensive enhancement. But Vivienne Blackstone had made a comment about Robert's little charity case, loud enough for everyone to hear. The laughter had rippled through the ballroom like poison, and Robert, standing beside his wife, had felt the heat of embarrassment burn through his chest. Instead of defending her, he had stepped away, physically distancing himself from the woman he had promised to love. The ride home had been silent. Brianna had stared out the window, her reflection showing the tears she refused to let fall in front of him. When they reached their apartment, she had simply asked, "Are you ashamed of me?" And Robert, in his cowardice, had answered with cruelty, "You don't fit in my world, Brianna. You never will." The divorce papers had been delivered 3 days later. Angel's voice pulled him back to the present. "She told me everything, Robert. How you made her sign those papers on Christmas Eve. How you threw a check at her feet and told her to buy herself something nice for once. How your last words to her were that she would always be nothing more than the poor girl who got lucky enough to catch your attention for a while." "I was young," Robert started weakly. "I was under pressure." "You were a coward," Angel cut him off. "And now you're going to understand exactly what it feels like to lose everything." She pressed a button on the conference phone. "Gianna, please send them in." The boardroom doors opened, and a stream of security officers entered, their uniforms bearing the Freeman Industries logo, a company Robert had never heard of until this morning. "Robert Downey," Angel announced formally, "by the power vested in me as majority shareholder of what is now Freeman Industries, you are hereby terminated from your position as CEO, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You have 15 minutes to collect your personal belongings." "You can't do this." Robert lurched to his feet, his face purple with rage. "I built this company. My name is on the building. Not anymore." Angel pulled out another document. "The building has been renamed the Brianna Freeman Tower as of this morning. The sign change should be complete by the time you reach the street." Harrison Clark tried to interject. "Miss Freeman, there are procedures, severance packages, legal protocols." "Mr. Downey's contract was surprisingly specific," Angel said smoothly. "In the event of a hostile takeover resulting in majority shareholder termination, he forfeits all severance rights. He wrote that clause himself, I believe, to prevent anyone from doing to him what he did to so many others." She paused, savoring the moment. "Ironic, isn't it?" Robert's legs gave out, and he collapsed back into his chair. For the first time in 20 years, he thought about Brianna's face that night. She had asked if he was ashamed of her. He remembered the hope dying in her eyes when he confirmed her worst fear. "She was pregnant," Angel said quietly, the words falling like bombs in the silent room. "When you threw her out with nothing but an insulting check, she was carrying me. She found out 3 days after you filed for divorce, when she collapsed on a subway platform and woke up in a hospital." The security officers moved forward, professionally but firmly helping Robert to his feet. As they led him toward the door, Angel called out one more time, "Oh, Robert, that check you threw at her feet, she never cashed it. She has it framed in her office with a note that says, 'The last payment on a debt that can never be collected.' She wanted me to tell you that when this day came." As the elevator doors closed on Robert's stunned face, Angel turned back to the window, looking out at the city that now belonged to her. Phase 1 was complete. The destruction of Robert Downey had officially begun. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Revenge. 20 years ago, Brianna Freeman learned that hope could die in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and broken dreams. She had woken to find a stranger sitting beside her bed, his kind eyes filled with concern. Isaiah Whitfield was 62 years old, a widower who had been walking through the subway station when he saw her collapse. His gentle hands had caught her before her head hit the concrete, and he had ridden with her in the ambulance, refusing to leave until he knew she was safe. "The baby is fine," the doctor had assured her, and Brianna had broken down completely, sobbing for the child who would never know their father, for the marriage that had crumbled like autumn leaves, for the future that seemed impossibly dark. Isaiah had stayed. This stranger, this unexpected guardian angel, had simply pulled his chair closer and held her hand while she cried. When she finally found her voice to thank him, he had said something that would change everything. "My dear, revenge is a dish best served by the next generation. Let me help you raise a warrior." Now, 20 years later, Angel Freeman stood in what had been Robert's office, running her fingers along the desk where he had signed so many deals, destroyed so many lives. Gianna Rhodes, her assistant and closest confidant, entered with a box of files. "These are all the records from the past 2 decades, Gianna said, setting them down carefully. "Every transaction, every betrayal, every person he stepped on to climb higher." Angel opened the first file, her photographic memory cataloging details. "Tell me about year 10. "Year 10 was when you turned 15, Gianna recited from memory. "You had already infiltrated 3 of his subsidiary companies under assumed names, working as an intern in accounting. You discovered the tax evasion scheme that would later become leverage. Your mother was working her 3rd job at the hospital, her heart already showing signs of stress. Isaiah was teaching you about corporate warfare in his study every evening." Angel touched a photograph tucked into the file. Brianna, at 33, exhausted but smiling, helping Angel with calculus homework at their tiny kitchen table. Her mother's hands, once soft and manicured when she was married to Robert, had become rough from years of cleaning offices at night. But her eyes had never lost their fierce love for her daughter. "She never complained," Angel said softly. "Not once. Even when the chest pains started, she just took aspirin and kept working." The memory transported her back to age 10, when Isaiah had first shown her Robert's photograph in a business magazine. "This is your father," he had said simply. "He has forgotten you exist. But you, my dear Angel, will make sure he never forgets your mother again." The training had been meticulous. While other children played with dolls, Angel studied corporate law. While teenagers went to parties, she attended board meetings under aliases, learning to read the room, to identify weakness, to strike without warning. Isaiah, with his vast fortune from decades in international finance, had funded it all. He had no children of his own, and in Brianna and Angel he had found the family he never expected. "Tell me about year 15, Angel requested, moving to the window. Gianna flipped through her notes. "You were 18. Isaiah was dying of cancer, and he had just restructured his entire estate to transfer to you upon his death. $60 billion in assets, hidden across shell companies to avoid detection. Your mother's heart condition had worsened, but she was still refusing treatment that would have meant taking time off work." Angel's jaw tightened at the memory. She had begged Brianna to stop working, had shown her the bank statements proving they had money now. But her mother had simply smiled and said, "This isn't about money anymore, baby. It's about showing you that we don't stop fighting, no matter what." Brianna had died on a Tuesday, a massive heart attack in the break room of the office building she cleaned. She had been found by the morning shift, her body cold, her phone still clutching Angel's graduation photo. She was 43 years old, worn down to nothing by 2 decades of struggle. At the funeral, Angel had stood alone. Isaiah had died 6 months prior, leaving her with a fortune and a promise to fulfill. As she watched them lower her mother's casket, she had whispered, "I'll destroy him, Mama. I'll take everything, just like he took everything from you." "Year 18, Gianna continued. "You began the acquisition phase, small purchases at first, a share here, a partnership there. You studied Robert's patterns, his weaknesses. His arrogance made him predictable. He never noticed the Freeman Foundation buying up his debts, acquiring leverage over his allies." Angel pulled out a thick folder labeled Phase 1 Acquisitions. Inside were contracts, each one a carefully placed domino in an elaborate design. She had bought the mortgage on Robert's mansion through a shell company. She had acquired majority stakes in the 3 banks that held his primary accounts. She had even purchased the country club where he held court every Sunday, though the board didn't know their new owner's identity yet. The Lawson acquisition was masterful, Gianna noted. Everett Lawson thought he was getting the deal of a lifetime when you offered him $40 million for his shares. He never questioned why someone would pay double their market value. Men like Everett don't question good fortune, Angel replied. They assume they deserve it, just like Robert assumed he deserved better than my mother. She moved to a locked drawer in the desk, pulling out a worn envelope. Inside was the check Robert had thrown at Brianna's feet 20 years ago. $20,000, what he had considered a generous severance for a wife of 3 years. Brianna had indeed kept it, not framed as Angel had told Robert, but in this envelope with a note, "Angel, my love, this check represents your father's estimation of my worth. Never let anyone decide your value for you. Love, Mama." Angel's phone buzzed. The building's deed transfer was complete. The Brianna Freeman Tower was official. She looked at the portrait of Robert that still hung on the wall. He hadn't had time to take it in his rushed exit. "Gianna, I want you to donate this portrait to the homeless shelter on 5th Avenue. The one where my mother stayed for 2 weeks after the divorce while she looked for work. They can use it for kindling this winter." Gianna smiled, making a note. "And the office renovation?" "Everything goes. But first, I want you to find the maintenance crew that works nights. Offer them all executive positions in our facilities management department, full benefits, triple their current salaries. Some of them knew my mother. They deserve better than minimum wage and invisible labor." As Gianna left to make arrangements, Angel sat in Robert's chair, her chair now, and opened her laptop. The screen showed Robert's financial portfolio in real time. She watched as the numbers began to change, each account frozen, each asset seized, each safety net cut away. He wouldn't notice immediately. It would take a few days for him to realize that his credit cards were declined, his accounts emptied, his entire financial existence erased. She pulled up another file, photographs from the past 20 years. Brianna at Angel's first science fair, proud despite her exhaustion. Brianna at high school graduation, tears streaming down her face. Brianna at the hospital during one of her cardiac episodes, still smiling, still fighting. And finally, the last photo, taken just a week before she died. Brianna and Angel at Isaiah's grave, promising to see this through. "He's going to suffer," Angel said to the empty office, to her mother's memory, to the ghost of every dream Robert had shattered. "Not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly, thoroughly, completely. Just like you suffered, Mama. Just like you planned." Chapter 3. The First Cut. Robert Downey discovered poverty at 3:47 on a Wednesday afternoon when his Platinum American Express was declined at the Hamilton Club. The waiter, a young man named James, who had served Robert for 15 years, stood awkwardly beside the table, the leather check folder still extended. The other diners, Judge Harrison Blackwell, Senator William Cross, and pharmaceutical executive Nathan Calloway, exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Run it again," Robert commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been denied anything. "There's obviously a mistake." James disappeared, returning moments later with the same apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, Mr. Downey, but the card has been declined. Perhaps you have another?" Robert produced his black card, the one with no limit, the one that had opened every door in Manhattan for 2 decades. James ran it. Declined. Then the corporate card. Declined. His personal Visa, his backup MasterCard, even the emergency debit card he kept hidden in his wallet. All declined. "This is ridiculous," Robert muttered, his face flushing as other diners began to notice the commotion. "Nathan, would you mind covering this? I'll have my assistant sort out this banking error immediately." Nathan Calloway hesitated just long enough for Robert to feel the sting of it, then slowly reached for his wallet. "Of course, Robert. These technical glitches happen. But the look in his eyes said something else entirely. It was the same look Robert had given to countless others over the years. The look that said, "You're finished, and everyone knows it." Robert excused himself, stepping outside to call his bank. The Manhattan skyline glittered in the afternoon sun, indifferent to his mounting panic. The first call went to his private banker at Chase. "Mr. Downey," the voice was professionally neutral, "I'm afraid all your accounts have been frozen pending investigation." "Investigation of what?" "Financial irregularities dating back 15 years. The authorities will be in touch." The line went dead. Robert's hands shook as he dialed his lawyer, Harrison Clark. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried his CFO, his COO, his entire executive team. Every call went unanswered. It was as if he had suddenly become radioactive. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email." With trembling fingers, Robert opened his inbox. The first message was from the mortgage company, notice of immediate foreclosure. His mansion, the crown jewel of his success, was being seized, effective immediately. He had 72 hours to vacate. The second email was from the IRS, notice of asset freeze pending investigation. The third was from his country club, membership revoked, outstanding debts. And they kept coming, every pillar of his life crumbling in real time, each email another cut in death by 1,000 paper cuts. His car lease terminated, his jet share cancelled, his investment accounts frozen, his corporate credit line revoked. Robert stumbled to his car, a Bentley Continental that he suddenly realized he no longer owned, and found a boot on the wheel. A notice was tucked under the windshield, "Vehicle scheduled for repossession." His phone rang. Finally, someone calling him back. But the voice that answered wasn't one of his allies. "Hello, Robert." Angel Freeman's voice was silk over steel. "Having a difficult day?" "You," Robert snarled, ducking into an alley to avoid the curious stares of passers-by. "You can't do this. I'll sue you for everything." "With what lawyers?" Angel interrupted. "Harrison Clark dropped you as a client an hour ago. So did every other firm in the city. Turns out they don't want to represent someone under federal investigation for tax evasion, embezzlement, and securities fraud." "Those are lies, are they?" "You might want to check the Wall Street Journal's website. The story just broke. Robert Downey under federal investigation for 2 decades of financial crimes. It's already been shared 12,000 times. Amazing how quickly news travels these days. Robert's phone buzzed with notifications, text messages from everyone he knew, all variations of the same theme, distancing themselves from him, cancelling meetings, revoking invitations. His social execution was being carried out in real time. "Why?" Robert asked, his voice breaking. "What did I ever do to you?" Angel's laugh was cold and mirthless. "You really don't remember, do you? You destroyed my mother so thoroughly that you erased her from your memory. She was that insignificant to you." "Brianna," Robert whispered. "She worked 3 jobs to raise me," Angel continued, her voice hardening. "Cleaning offices at night, working retail during the day, taking in sewing on weekends. Do you know what that does to a person's body, Robert? The constant exhaustion, the stress, the worry about making rent and buying groceries." Robert slumped against the brick wall of the alley. A memory surfaced unbidden. Brianna's hands. When they'd met, they'd been soft, artistic, the hands of someone who painted and played piano. By the end of their marriage, he'd noticed calluses, but he'd never asked why. "She never stopped loving you," Angel said, and somehow that was worse than anger. "Even after everything, she kept your wedding photo. She died holding it." Died. The word came out as a croak. 5 years ago. Heart failure brought on by 2 decades of overwork and stress. She was 43 years old, Robert. 43. She should have had decades left, but you stole them from her. You stole everything from her." Robert's phone buzzed again, a notification from his bank. His checking account balance was now 0. His savings, 0. Everything, 0. "I'm calling the police," Robert said desperately. "This is theft." "Actually, it's perfectly legal," Angel informed him. "You see, that prenuptial agreement you made my mother sign had some interesting clauses you never bothered to read. In the event of divorce without cause, any children from the marriage would have full claim to marital assets upon reaching 21. I turn 21 next week, but the courts were happy to expedite the process given the circumstances. We didn't have children. My mother was pregnant when you divorced her. The timestamp on the hospital records proves I was conceived during your marriage. Legally, I'm your daughter. Legally, everything you built during those 3 years belongs to me." Robert's legs gave out. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the filthy alley ground, his $1,000 suit absorbing the grime of the city. This couldn't be happening. He was Robert Downey. He had dinner with senators. He owned judges. "Your apartment will be padlocked when you arrive," Angel continued conversationally. "Your belongings have been moved to a storage unit in Queens. You have 30 days to claim them before they're auctioned. Oh, and that storage unit, it's the same one where my mother kept our things when we were evicted from our apartment 6 months after the divorce. Full circle, don't you think?" "Please," Robert heard himself beg. "I have nothing." "Now you're learning," Angel said. "But don't worry, Robert. This is just the beginning. The first cut. You're going to experience every moment of desperation my mother felt, every humiliation, every fear, and unlike her, you won't have a child to give you hope. You won't have love to sustain you. You'll have exactly what you gave her. Nothing." The line went dead. Robert sat in the alley, his phone buzzing with notifications of his destruction, watching his empire crumble in real time. Pedestrians walked past the alley entrance, but no one looked at him. He had become invisible, just another piece of human debris in the city's margins. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows between the buildings, Robert finally understood what Brianna must have felt that Christmas Eve when he'd thrown her out. The vertigo of falling from great heights, the suffocating panic of having no safety net, the realization that the person you trusted most had pushed you off the edge. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. So he sat there, in an alley that smelled of garbage and decay, and for the first time in 20 years, Robert Downey cried, not for what he had lost, but for the sudden, terrible understanding of what he had destroyed. Chapter 4. The Revelation. The Liberty Grand Ballroom sparkled with the desperate glamour of those pretending nothing had changed. But everyone knew Robert Downey was drowning. He had snuck in through the service entrance, his last decent suit carefully pressed, his shoes polished to hide the wear. The charity gala for Manhattan Children's Hospital was one of the few events that hadn't explicitly banned him, yet. Robert had come hoping to find one ally, one friend, one person who might throw him a lifeline. Instead, he found himself standing alone by the bar, watching former associates deliberately avoid eye contact. Conversations hushed when he approached, circles closed before he could enter them. He was a ghost haunting his former life. "Champagne, sir?" The bartender's tone was professionally neutral, but Robert caught the flicker of recognition, the slight curl of disdain. "Scotch," Robert replied, then remembered he couldn't pay for it. "Actually, just water." "The bar is open tonight, sir, courtesy of tonight's primary sponsor." Robert accepted the Scotch gratefully, not bothering to ask who the sponsor was. He already knew. Everything these days led back to Angel Freeman. The crowd suddenly stirred, a wave of whispers rippling through the ballroom. Robert turned to see Angel entering through the main doors, and his breath caught in his throat. She was devastating in a crimson gown that moved like liquid fire, diamonds at her throat that caught the light with every step. But it wasn't her beauty that made the room stop. It was her presence, the gravitational pull of absolute power. She moved through the crowd like visiting royalty, accepting air kisses and handshakes from the same people who had once laughed at her mother. Nathan Calloway, who had sneered at Brianna's dress 20 years ago, now bowed slightly as Angel passed. Vivienne Blackstone, who had called Brianna Robert's charity case, now competed for Angel's attention. Behind Angel walked an elderly black woman in a wheelchair, dignified despite her age, her eyes sharp and knowing. Robert didn't recognize her, but something about her bearing made his stomach clench with premonition. Angel's eyes found Robert across the room, and she smiled, not the cold, calculating smile he'd seen in the boardroom, but something infinitely worse. Pity. She approached him with deliberate slowness, the crowd parting before her like the Red Sea. When she finally stood before him, Robert could smell her perfume, the same jasmine scent Brianna had worn, but elevated, refined, weaponized. "Robert," she said, loud enough for others to hear, "I'm surprised you came." "It's a public event," he replied, hating how defensive he sounded. "Actually, it's invitation only, but don't worry, I added your name to the list. I wanted you here for this." She turned to address the room, her voice carrying without effort. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. Tonight's gala is particularly special for me, as it honors the memory of someone who couldn't be here. My mother, Brianna Freeman." The lights dimmed, and a screen descended behind the stage. Robert's stomach clenched as Brianna's face appeared, young, radiant, full of hope. It was their wedding photo, one he didn't even remember being taken. 20 years ago," Angel continued, "my mother was married to someone in this room, someone who promised to love and protect her, then discarded her when she became inconvenient. She was pregnant with me when he filed for divorce on Christmas Eve." Gasps rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned to Robert, who wished the floor would swallow him whole. The screen changed, showing a series of photographs. Brianna working at a diner, exhaustion evident in her posture. Brianna mopping floors at an office building at 2 in the morning. Brianna at a food bank, too proud to cry as she accepted charity to feed her child. "These photos were taken by Isaiah Whitfield," Angel explained. "A stranger who became our guardian angel. He documented our journey, believing that one day the truth should be known." Another photo. Brianna collapsed in a hospital bed, machines keeping her alive, Angel as a teenager holding her hand. "This was taken during one of her cardiac episodes." Angel's voice never wavered. "The doctors said her heart was damaged from years of chronic stress. She was 38 here. She looked 50. The screen changed again. Robert saw himself, younger, arrogant, standing at this very charity gala 20 years ago. Beside him, Brianna in her simple black dress, and his own face was turned away from her, creating physical distance while she stood alone in a sea of hostile strangers. "I remember that night," Vivienne Blackstone suddenly spoke from the crowd, her voice carrying in the hushed ballroom. "I made cruel comments about her dress, called her things I'm ashamed to repeat." Robert laughed. He laughed while his wife stood there, trying not to cry. Other voices joined in, a chorus of confession from those who had participated in Brianna's humiliation. Each admission was another stone thrown at Robert's already shattered reputation. "This was taken 3 weeks before the divorce," Angel said. The photographer was capturing the event's sponsors. Notice how Robert positioned himself, ashamed to be seen with his own wife. "That's enough," Robert said, his voice cracking. "No," Angel replied sharply. "It's not nearly enough." The screen now showed a video, security footage from an office building. Brianna, heavily pregnant, scrubbing floors on her hands and knees at 3 in the morning. The timestamp showed it was just 2 weeks before Angel's birth. "She worked until the day I was born," Angel narrated. "The janitor who worked with her said she would talk to me while she cleaned, promising me a better life, telling me about my father who didn't know I existed. The video changed. Hospital footage. Brianna in labor, alone, no one to hold her hand. I obtained these from the hospital archives, Angel explained. She was in labor for 18 hours. When they asked for an emergency contact, she had no one to call. The elderly woman in the wheelchair began to cry, and Angel walked over to comfort her. "This is Dorothy Freeman, my grandmother," Angel announced. "She never got to hold her daughter's hand during those 18 hours. She never got to meet me until I was 16 because my mother was too ashamed to go home after Robert destroyed her." Dorothy's voice, weathered but strong, filled the ballroom. "My baby girl was brilliant. She had a scholarship to Columbia. She was going to be a teacher. Then she met him." She pointed a trembling finger at Robert. "And he killed her slowly, over 20 years. Robert's hands shook so badly he dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound sharp in the horrified silence of the ballroom. Several people stepped back from him, as if his misfortune might be contagious. The screen showed one final image, Brianna on her deathbed, skeletal thin, her hand clutching something. Angel zoomed in. It was Robert's business card, one he'd given her when they first met, with his handwritten note on the back. "Forever yours." "She kept this until the end," Angel said, her voice finally showing emotion. "Even after everything, she kept believing in the man who destroyed her. She died at 43, her heart literally broken from 2 decades of struggle." Angel walked closer to Robert, close enough that only he could hear her next words. "Everyone in this room now knows exactly who you are," she whispered. "They know you're my father. They know you abandoned us. And they know that everything I'm about to do to you is justice." She stepped back, addressing the room again. "The Brianna Freeman Foundation, which I'm launching tonight with a $100 million endowment, will provide support for single mothers abandoned by their partners. We'll provide housing, childcare, education, and job training. We'll ensure no woman suffers like my mother did." Applause thundered through the ballroom. People were crying, some perhaps genuinely moved, others performing grief for Angel's approval. "And," Angel added, raising her voice over the applause, "we'll be purchasing the Downey Industries building to serve as our headquarters. It seems fitting that where my father built his empire on the backs of others, we'll build a foundation to lift them up." She turned back to Robert one last time. "You're welcome to stay for dinner, Father. We're serving the same meal my mother ate the night you divorced her. A can of soup she heated on a hot plate in a motel room. I had the chef recreate it exactly. I thought you should taste what poverty tastes like." As Angel walked away, the crowd's reaction was immediate and brutal. People Robert had known for decades turned their backs. Whispered conversations full of his name, but empty of sympathy. One by one, they moved away from him until he stood in an empty circle, as isolated as Brianna had been at that party 20 years ago. Senator William Cross, who had once golfed with Robert weekly, made a show of deleting Robert's contact from his phone in full view of everyone. "I can't be associated with someone who could do that to a pregnant woman," he announced loudly. Everett Lawson, his former partner, approached briefly. "I had no idea she was your daughter," he said, but there was no apology in his tone. "If I had known, I still would have sold to her. At least she pays well for revenge." Judge Harrison Blackwell was less subtle. "You destroyed that poor girl, and now her daughter is destroying you. There's poetry in that, don't you think?" Robert fled then, stumbling through the same service entrance he'd entered, out into the night where rain had begun to fall. He had nowhere to go. The shelter wouldn't open until 10, and he'd learned to time his arrivals to secure a bed. As he walked through the empty streets, Robert finally understood the full scope of Angel's revenge. It wasn't just about taking his money or his company. It was about revealing him, stripping away the carefully constructed image to show the shallow, cruel man beneath. She had turned him into a cautionary tale, a pariah whose name would forever be associated with the abandonment of a pregnant wife. But worse than the public humiliation was the knowledge that Brianna had died still loving him, still keeping his business card like a talisman. He had broken her body, but never her heart. That faithful heart had simply given out, worn down by years of trying to survive what he had done to her. Chapter 5. The Stripping of Pride. Dawn broke grey and unforgiving over Manhattan as Robert Downey reported for his first day as a janitor in the building that had once borne his name. The supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Lucia Reeves, handed him a uniform, polyester pants, and a shirt with Freeman Industries maintenance embroidered on the pocket. Her eyes held no sympathy, only professional assessment. "You'll start with the executive floors," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Bathrooms first, then offices. Your shift is 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. Minimum wage, no benefits for the first 90 days. Any questions?" Robert wanted to scream that this was insane, that just weeks ago he had owned this building, that the executive bathroom she wanted him to clean had been his private sanctuary. Instead, he simply took the uniform and nodded. The employee changing room was in the basement, a windowless space that smelled of industrial cleaning supplies and resignation. 3 other janitors were preparing for their shifts, their conversation stopping when Robert entered. They knew who he was. Everyone in the building did. "So it's true," one of them, an older black man named Jerome, said quietly. "You're really Brianna's husband." "Ex-husband," Robert corrected, pulling on the uniform that scratched against his skin. "I knew her," Jerome continued. "She worked the night shift here about 15 years ago. Sweet lady. Always asked about my kids, remembered their names, shared her dinner with me when I forgot mine, even though I could tell she barely had enough for herself." Robert's hands stilled on the uniform buttons. "She worked here for 3 years. Cleaned these very floors while you conducted business upstairs. Don't think you ever noticed her, though. She made sure to work nights, said she didn't want to embarrass anyone." The words hit Robert like physical blows. Brianna had been here, in his building, cleaning up after him, and he'd never known. Or worse, had he known and simply not cared? "Angel gave us all promotions last week," another janitor, a young woman named Maria, added. "Tripled our salaries, full benefits, college tuition for our kids. Said it's what her mother would have wanted." They dispersed to their assignments, leaving Robert alone with his mop bucket and the crushing weight of his new reality. The executive floor was 60 stories up, an elevator ride that used to represent his ascension to power. Now it felt like climbing to his own execution. The hallway was familiar, yet foreign from this perspective. He'd walked these marble floors thousands of times, never noticing the scuff marks, the corners where dirt accumulated, the fingerprints on glass doors. Now, on his knees with a scrub brush, every imperfection seemed to mock him. He started with the bathroom, his former private bathroom. The marble countertops he'd selected personally, the gold fixtures he'd insisted on, the mirror where he'd adjusted his tie before destroying someone's career. Now he was cleaning another man's urine from around the toilet, the ammonia fumes making his eyes water. Missed a spot. Robert looked up to find Angel standing in the doorway, immaculate in a white suit that made her look like an avenging angel. She pointed to a yellow stain near the base of the toilet. "Your replacement has poor aim," she observed clinically. "But then, men like him always do. They make messes for others to clean up." Robert returned to scrubbing, his knees aching against the cold tile. Angel didn't leave. She watched him work, her presence making every movement feel performative, humiliating. "Do you know what my mother's knees looked like?" she asked suddenly. Permanently bruised, calloused from years of kneeling on floors like this. She would ice them at night, but by morning she'd be back on them again. I didn't know. Because you didn't ask. You didn't care. She was furniture to you, less than furniture. At least you noticed when furniture was out of place. Angel's phone buzzed. "Your mother is here," she announced, and Robert's blood turned to ice. Eleanor Downey arrived like winter, her presence dropping the temperature of the room. At 78, she still carried herself like the society matron she'd always been, spine straight, chin high, diamonds glittering at her throat. But her eyes, when they found her son on his knees in a janitor's uniform, held something Robert had never seen before: disgust. "So it's true," Eleanor said, her voice arctic. "Everything that girl said about you." "Mother, I can explain. Can you?" Eleanor turned to Angel. "Show me." Angel produced a tablet, swiping through images and videos. Robert couldn't see the screen, but he could see his mother's face as she watched, the color draining, her perfectly painted lips parting in horror, her hands beginning to shake. "This is Brianna working while 9 months pregnant," Angel narrated. "This is her giving birth alone. This is her working 3 jobs. This is her at the food bank. This is her collapsed at a bus stop. This is her dying in a charity ward because she couldn't afford better care." Eleanor's legs gave out. Angel caught her, guiding her to a chair that materialized from somewhere. The older woman was crying now, tears destroying her carefully applied makeup. "I helped you," Eleanor whispered to Robert. "When you said she wasn't right for our family, I supported you. I thought she was after your money." A bitter laugh. "But she never cashed the check, did she? She was the only one who truly loved you, and we destroyed her." "Mother, please." Eleanor stood, removing the diamond necklace from her throat, the Downey family heirloom passed down for 5 generations. She placed it in Angel's hands. "This belonged to my grandmother," Eleanor said formally. "She would have wanted Brianna's daughter to have it. You are my granddaughter, the only good thing to come from my son's miserable life." She turned to Robert one last time. "You are no longer my son. My lawyer will remove you from my will today. Everything will go to Angel, as it should have from the beginning." Eleanor left without looking back, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown to Robert's complete abandonment. Angel followed, pausing at the door. "Finish the bathrooms," she said, "then the offices. Make sure you get under the desks. That's where executives like to hide their sins." Robert worked in silence for hours, his body screaming in protest. His soft hands blistered from the cleaning chemicals, his back spasmed from bending, his knees bled through the cheap uniform. By noon, he understood that this wasn't just about humiliation, it was about education. Every ache was a lesson in what Brianna had endured. During his break, he sat in the maintenance room eating the sandwich he'd made from expired bread and peanut butter, all he could afford. Jerome sat beside him, pulling out a photo from his wallet. "This was taken 18 years ago," Jerome said, showing a picture of a younger Brianna with a toddler Angel and Jerome's family at what looked like a small birthday party in the break room. "We celebrated Angel's 2nd birthday here because Brianna couldn't afford a party. We all chipped in for a cake. That little girl blew out her candles and wished for her daddy to come find them." Robert stared at the photo, his daughter as a toddler, his wife surrounded by janitors who had become her only family, a birthday party in a basement break room. They looked happy despite everything, a chosen family built from shared struggle. "She talked about you sometimes," Jerome continued. "Not badly, just sadly, like you were dead rather than gone. I think that would have been easier for her to accept. Why are you telling me this?" Jerome stood, tucking the photo away. "Because Miss Angel asked me to. She wants you to know exactly what you missed. Every birthday in break rooms, every Christmas with donated presents, every milestone you should have witnessed. She wants you to know that we were there for them when you weren't." As Robert returned to his work, muscles he didn't know existed screaming in protest. He realized this was only day one. Angel owned the building, controlled his schedule, determined his assignments. She could keep him here indefinitely, making him clean up after the success that had replaced his own. By the time his shift ended, Robert could barely walk. His hands were raw, his knees bloodied, his back twisted in agony. He limped to the subway, ignoring the stares at his stained uniform, and made his way to the shelter that had become his home. That night, lying on a thin cot surrounded by snoring strangers, Robert thought about Brianna doing this work while pregnant, then going home to care for a baby, then getting up to do it again. Day after day, year after year, until her body simply gave out. He finally understood that Angel wasn't just taking his money or his reputation. She was making him live every moment of struggle his ex-wife had endured, forcing him to walk in the footsteps of the woman he'd discarded. And somewhere in the darkness of that shelter, Robert realized this was still only the beginning. Chapter 6. The Public Humiliation. The documentary premiered on a Thursday evening, simultaneously released on every major streaming platform and projected on the electronic billboards of Times Square. Robert discovered it while passing an electronics store on his way to the shelter, frozen in horror as his younger face filled a dozen screens. The title blazed across the image, "The Price of Pride, A Daughter's Search for Justice." A crowd had gathered to watch, their faces illuminated by the flickering lights. Robert pulled his hood up, but it was too late. Someone recognized him. "That's him!" A teenager pointed, her phone already recording. "That's the guy who abandoned his pregnant wife." Within seconds, Robert was surrounded by phones, all recording his humiliation as the documentary played out his sins on the screens behind him. He tried to push through the crowd, but they followed, their cameras tracking his retreat like predators sensing wounded prey. The documentary was everywhere. Angel had purchased advertising space on every platform, every billboard, every subway screen. Robert couldn't escape his own face, his own words, his own cruelty played back in devastating high definition. He ducked into a coffee shop, but the documentary was playing on their television too. The customers turned to stare as his voice echoed through the space. A recording from 20 years ago, captured by someone at that fateful party. "She's embarrassing," his younger self said clearly. "Look at her dress, look at her shoes. I'm supposed to be closing deals with senators, and she looks like she shops at discount stores." "Because she does," another voice, Everett Lawson, laughed. "Honestly, Robert, what were you thinking? She's pretty enough for a mistress, but wife material." "I was thinking with the wrong head," younger Robert replied, and the men's laughter was cruel, dismissive. "Don't worry, I'm handling it." The coffee shop patrons stared at Robert with open disgust. A mother covered her daughter's ears. The barista refused to serve him, pointing to a hastily made sign, "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." Robert fled back to the streets, but there was no escape. The documentary followed him everywhere, Angel's voice narrating the systematic destruction of her mother's life. "This is Brianna Freeman at 22, Angel's voice carried across Times Square. She was studying to be a teacher, working part-time to pay for college. She met Robert Downey at a bookstore. He pursued her relentlessly, said her lack of pretension was refreshing. The screen showed photos of young Brianna, radiant, hopeful, her whole life ahead of her. Then the progression, Brianna at her wedding, simple but beautiful. Brianna at corporate events, increasingly isolated. Brianna pregnant and alone. Brianna working multiple jobs. Brianna aging decades in just years. Brianna in a hospital bed, dying. But the real story, Angel's voice continued, isn't just about one man's cruelty. It's about a system that enables such cruelty, that rewards men who discard women like broken toys. The documentary included interviews with everyone who had witnessed Robert's behavior. Former secretaries described how he'd forbidden them from speaking to Brianna. Business partners recounted his jokes about his charity case wife. Even his former mistresses appeared, revealing that he'd been cheating throughout the marriage. One interview stood out: Penelope Hart, Robert's former secretary, now in her 60s, tears streaming down her face. "I helped Brianna once," Penelope admitted. "Gave her information about Robert's hidden assets during the divorce. He found out and destroyed my career. I've been working minimum wage jobs ever since, but I'd do it again. That poor girl needed someone on her side." Angel appeared on screen, sitting in what used to be Robert's office. "My mother never knew that Penelope tried to help her. By the time the information arrived, she was too exhausted to fight. She signed whatever Robert wanted just to be free of him." The documentary then shifted to Robert's business practices. The families destroyed by his hostile takeovers, the employees laid off while he collected bonuses, the communities devastated by his developments. Angel had compiled 20 years of his victims, giving them voice and platform. "He destroyed my father's company," an elderly man said. "Dad built it over 40 years. Robert bought it and gutted it in 6 months. My father died of a heart attack the day the demolition began. He fired me while I was on maternity leave," a woman testified. "Said the company needed dedicated employees. He foreclosed on our family home 3 days before Christmas," another voice added. "We'd missed one payment because our son was in the hospital." Story after story, witness after witness, painting Robert not as a successful businessman, but as a predator who fed on the vulnerable. The documentary was meticulous, fact-checked, legally bulletproof. Angel had spent years preparing it, gathering evidence, building an irrefutable case. Robert's phone, the cheap, prepaid one he'd bought with his janitor wages, buzzed with notifications. The documentary was trending globally. "Justice for Brianna" had become the top hashtag on every platform. His Wikipedia page had been updated to lead with "known for abandoning his pregnant wife." His business school case studies were being removed from curricula. He tried to return to the shelter, but a crowd had gathered there too. Someone had printed screenshots from the documentary and plastered them on the walls. The shelter manager, a kind woman named Patricia, who had always treated him with dignity, met him at the door. "I'm sorry, Mr. Downey," she said, and she did look sorry. "But the other residents are threatening to leave if you stay. They say they don't feel safe around someone who could do what you did." "Where am I supposed to go?" Patricia handed him a piece of paper. "There's another shelter on the Lower East Side, but honestly, after this documentary, I don't know if anywhere will take you." As Robert walked through the night, the documentary continued playing around him. Every store, every billboard, every phone screen seemed to be showing his destruction on loop. A group of young women crossed the street to avoid him. A man spat at his feet. A child pointed and asked loudly, "Mommy, is that the bad man who hurt his wife?" His former wife, Claire, the one he'd married after Brianna, the one who'd divorced him just weeks ago when his money ran out, appeared on a talk show being broadcast in a bar window. "I had no idea about his first wife," Claire said, dabbing at fake tears. "If I had known he'd abandoned a pregnant woman, I never would have married him. The man is a monster." The interviewer leaned forward sympathetically. "You must feel so betrayed." "I do," Claire confirmed, wearing jewelry Robert had bought her, living in the apartment he'd provided. "I'm just grateful I got out before he could destroy me too." Robert laughed bitterly at the irony. Claire had known exactly who he was. She'd married him for his money and left the moment it disappeared. But now she was rewriting history, casting herself as another victim in his narrative of destruction. He finally found the other shelter, but news traveled fast. The residents had organized a protest, blocking the entrance with signs, "No room for deadbeat dads," and "Brianna deserved better." The shelter manager, an older man with sad eyes, pulled Robert aside. "I can give you one night," he said quietly. "In the morning, you need to find somewhere else. Angel Freeman called. She's offered to fund a new wing for our shelter. but only if we maintain certain standards about who we serve. Robert understood. Angel had made him radioactive, untouchable. Every shelter, every charity, every resource for the destitute now depended on her funding. And her funding came with one condition: no sanctuary for Robert Downey. That night, lying on a cot that would be his last, Robert watched the documentary on someone else's phone. They were watching the final segment, where Angel stood at her mother's grave. "My mother died believing in love," Angel said to the camera. "Even after everything, she believed that people were essentially good, that anyone could change. I don't share her faith. Some people are beyond redemption, some cruelties can never be forgiven, some debts can only be paid in suffering." The camera pulled back to reveal the headstone, Brianna Freeman, beloved mother. Her heart was too good for this world. And below it, freshly carved, murdered by poverty, sentenced by Robert Downey. The documentary ended with a simple message. Robert Downey has never paid a cent in child support. He has never acknowledged his daughter. He has never apologized for his actions. Until he does all three, publicly and completely, this documentary will play on loop in Times Square, funded in perpetuity by the Freeman Foundation. Robert closed his eyes, but he could still see Brianna's face from the documentary, not the young, hopeful girl he'd married, but the exhausted woman she'd become, the woman he'd created through his cruelty, the woman whose death he'd authored through his abandonment. Tomorrow, he would have nowhere to go. Angel had ensured that every door would close, every hand would withdraw, every mercy would be denied. He would walk the streets, wearing his shame like a scarlet letter, recognized and reviled wherever he went. The documentary would play forever, his cruelty immortalized, his name forever linked with the worst kind of cowardice. And somewhere in the city, Angel Freeman sat in the tower that bore her mother's name, orchestrating his continued destruction with the patience of someone who had waited 20 years for this moment. Chapter 7. The False Hope. Monday arrived with deceptive sunshine and an offer that seemed like salvation. Robert had spent 3 nights sleeping in Central Park, hidden in the brambles like an animal, washing in public fountains at dawn before the joggers arrived. His beard had grown wild, his clothes reeked, and his stomach cramped from hunger. So when his prepaid phone rang with an unknown number, he answered with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for rope. "Mr. Downey." The voice was professionally warm. "My name is Mitchell Graves from Graves & Associates. Miss Freeman has asked me to present you with an opportunity." Robert's hand tightened on the phone. What kind of opportunity? "A press conference. Tomorrow noon at the Freeman Tower. If you publicly acknowledge paternity, apologize for abandoning your family, and sign over your remaining hidden asset, we know about the Cayman Islands account, Mr. Downey, to the Brianna Freeman Foundation. Miss Freeman will cease all current actions against you." Robert's heart hammered. The Cayman account held $3 million, money he'd hidden from everyone, his last emergency fund. But $3 million was nothing compared to what he'd lost, and if Angel would stop her destruction. She'll really stop. Those are her terms. Full public confession, the money transferred, and she'll call off the dogs. You have 24 hours to decide. Robert didn't need 24 hours. "I'll do it." The next day, cleaned up in a suit provided by Angel's people, Robert stood at a podium in the Freeman Tower's conference room. Every major news outlet had sent representatives. The room blazed with cameras and hostile faces, eager to witness his humiliation. Angel sat in the front row, resplendent in a cream-colored suit, her expression unreadable. Beside her sat an elderly black woman Robert didn't recognize, holding Angel's hand. Mitchell Graves handed Robert a prepared statement. The words swam before his eyes, each sentence another nail in his coffin. "I stand before you today to acknowledge truths I have denied for 20 years, Robert read, his voice hollow. "I am the biological father of Angel Freeman. I abandoned her mother, Brianna Freeman, when she was pregnant. I divorced her on Christmas Eve, leaving her with nothing while carrying my child. The cameras clicked like hungry insects. Someone in the back whispered, "Monster." Robert continued, each word cutting deeper. I was cruel. I was callous. I chose money and status over love and responsibility. Brianna Freeman died because of the poverty I condemned her to. I am responsible for her death. His voice cracked on the last words. He looked at Angel, hoping for some sign of mercy, but her face remained stone. As partial recompense for my actions, Robert continued, I am transferring my remaining assets to the Brianna Freeman Foundation. I know money cannot resurrect the dead or undo the past, but I hope it can help other women who find themselves abandoned as Brianna was. He signed the transfer documents, his signature shaky. $3 million, his last safety net. Gone. But if it bought him peace. Furthermore, Robert read, reaching the final paragraph, I apologize to Angel Freeman, my daughter, whom I never acknowledged, never supported, never loved. I apologize to the memory of Brianna Freeman, the only woman who ever truly loved me, whom I discarded like garbage. I am sorry. The room erupted with questions, but Angel raised her hand for silence. She approached the podium, replacing Robert at the microphone. He started to leave the stage, but she gestured for him to stay. Thank you, Robert, for that performance, she said, and the word performance carried like a slap. I'm sure everyone here was deeply moved by your sincerity. She turned to the cameras. Robert Downey has just confessed to abandoning his pregnant wife and unborn child. He has admitted to causing my mother's death through deliberate impoverishment. These are crimes, moral if not legal, and crimes require punishment. Robert's blood froze. You said you'd stop. You promised. I promised to cease current actions, Angel corrected. The foreclosure is complete. The accounts are already frozen. The documentary has aired. Those current actions are ceased. But did you really think that would be enough? Did you think $3 million, money you stole and hid while my mother worked herself to death, would purchase absolution? She nodded to someone off stage. Security guards moved to block the exits. You see, Robert, I lied. Just like you lied to my mother when you promised to love her forever. Just like you lied to your business partners before destroying them. Just like you've lied your entire life. Angel pulled out a tablet, swiping to reveal financial records. The $3 million you just transferred, it's already been distributed to the families you destroyed over the years. The Hendersons, whose father committed suicide after you destroyed his business. The Walkers, whose daughter couldn't afford cancer treatment after you terminated their health insurance. The Nguyens, who lost their family restaurant to your development project. She showed him the transactions, each one tagged with a family name and a brief description of how Robert had ruined them. But here's the best part, Angel continued, her smile sharp as glass. Your confession was legally binding. You've admitted to fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The FBI agents waiting outside will be very interested in your statement. As if on cue, federal agents entered the room, their badges gleaming under the camera lights. No! Robert shouted. You tricked me! You said— I said you should know how my mother felt, Angel interrupted. She believed your promises too. She thought when you said you loved her, you meant it. She thought when you promised to care for her, you would. Do you understand now how it feels to have hope dangled before you, only to have it snatched away? The elderly woman beside Angel stood, and Robert finally recognized her, Lucia Reeves, his supervisor from his janitor position. But that wasn't who she really was. This is Dorothy Freeman, Angel announced. My maternal grandmother. The woman my mother was too ashamed to contact after you threw her out because she'd warned Mom not to marry you. She spent 20 years thinking her daughter had chosen you over family, not knowing Mom was too proud to admit she'd been wrong. Dorothy approached Robert, her dignified bearing making his expensive suit look cheap. My daughter died alone because of you. Dorothy said quietly. She was too ashamed to come home, too proud to admit you'd broken her. I found out about her death from a newspaper obituary. I didn't even get to say goodbye. She pulled out a photograph, Brianna as a child, bright and full of promise. This was my baby girl, before you, before she learned that love could be a weapon. The FBI agents moved forward. Robert Downey, you're under arrest for tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. As they cuffed him, Robert looked desperately at Angel. This isn't justice. This is revenge. No, Angel replied calmly. Justice would be bringing my mother back. Justice would be giving me the father I deserved. Justice would be erasing the years of suffering you caused. This question mark. This is consequence, something you've avoided your entire life until now. The agents led him away, cameras capturing every moment. The last thing Robert saw was Angel embracing her grandmother, both women crying for the one person who should have been there, Brianna, whose absence filled the room like a ghost. Outside, protesters cheered as Robert was placed in the FBI vehicle. Someone had written on the car window, 20 years too late. The documentary played on the building's external screens. Brianna's face stories tall, looking down at his arrest with eyes that would never see justice truly served. As the car pulled away, Robert finally understood the completeness of Angel's plan. She hadn't just taken his money, his reputation, his freedom. She had given him hope, made him believe in mercy, only to reveal it was an illusion, just as he had done to Brianna, just as he had done to so many others. The false hope was worse than no hope at all. It was the cruelest cut yet in Angel's symphony of revenge. Chapter 8. The Lost Fortune. The revelation came during the third week of Robert's federal detention, delivered by his court-appointed lawyer in a windowless consultation room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and despair. There's something about your prenuptial agreement you need to see, the lawyer, an exhausted public defender named Carl Morrison said, sliding a document across the metal table. Robert recognized it immediately, the prenup he'd made Brianna sign 2 days before their courthouse wedding. He'd been so proud of it then, bulletproof protection for his assets. Harrison Clark, his lawyer at the time, had called it aggressively protective, but Robert had insisted on every clause. Now, reading it with 20 years of consequence behind him, certain phrases leaped out like accusations. Section 7. Subsection C, Morrison highlighted with a yellow marker. In the event of divorce initiated by the party of the first part, that's you, without demonstrable cause of adultery, abuse, or abandonment by the party of the second part, that's Brianna, any offspring produced during the legal union shall be entitled to full claim of all marital assets upon reaching the age of majority. Robert's vision blurred. What does that mean? It means you wrote your own destruction into the contract 20 years ago, Morrison explained. Your lawyer at the time, Harrison Clark, apparently tried to warn you about this clause, but you insisted on it. You wanted to ensure Brianna couldn't claim child support if she got pregnant to trap you, so you made any children the sole beneficiaries instead. Morrison produced a yellowed legal memo, Harrison Clark's letterhead still visible. I found this in the archived files. Clark wrote to you 3 times warning that this clause could backfire. You responded, and I quote, Brianna is too naive to ever use this against me, and we won't have children anyway. You were wrong on both counts. But we didn't have children during the marriage. Morrison pulled out another document, medical records. Angel Freeman was conceived 6 weeks before your divorce filing. The DNA test you just took confirms paternity. Legally, she was your child from the moment of conception, which occurred during your marriage. The room spun. Robert gripped the table to steady himself. But the age of majority is 18. In New York for inheritance purposes involving complex estates, it's 21. Angel Freeman turns 21 in 6 days. Morrison spread out more papers, deeds, contracts, bank statements, investment portfolios. Everything you built during your 3-year marriage to Brianna, which was the foundation of your entire empire, legally belongs to Angel. The prenup you designed to protect yourself has instead handed her everything. That can't be legal. You had the best lawyers money could buy draft this. It's ironclad. You wanted to make sure Brianna could never touch your assets, so you made the language absolute, immutable, no loopholes, no exceptions, no escape clauses. Morrison's laugh was bitter. You built your own prison and locked yourself inside. A knock on the door interrupted them. An FBI agent entered, followed by Angel Freeman herself, dressed in a navy suit that made her look like corporate royalty. She carried a leather portfolio that Robert recognized. It had been his, a gift from a Japanese investor worth more than most people's cars. Behind her entered another figure, Harrison Clark himself, now in his 80s, walking with a cane but eyes still sharp. "Hello, Father," Angel said, the word father wielded like a blade. "I thought you should hear this from me, and I brought Mr. Clark to verify the authenticity of what I'm about to show you." Harrison Clark's voice was dry as dust. "Robert, I told you this would happen. 23 years ago, I sat in your office and warned you that this prenuptial agreement was a ticking time bomb. You laughed at me. You said I was being paranoid." Angel opened the portfolio, revealing document after document, each one a transfer of ownership. "As of midnight on my birthday, I will legally own everything you created during your marriage to my mother. But here's what you don't know. I've traced every acquisition, every expansion, every investment that grew from that original seed money." Angel produced a forensic accounting report, thick as a phone book. "Your first major acquisition, Hendrix Industries, was purchased with capital gained during your marriage. That acquisition funded the next 12. Those 12 funded 40 more. It's all fruit from the poison tree, Robert, and the tree belongs to me." She turned to a specific page, showing a flowchart that looked like a spider's web of financial connections. "My forensic accountants, 16 of them working for 3 years, traced every dollar. The compound interest alone from your marital assets amounts to $4 billion. The leveraged buyouts using that capital, another $6 billion. The real estate empire built on those profits, $8 billion more. That's impossible. I built my empire over 20 years on a foundation created during your marriage," Angel interrupted. "Every financial forensic expert I've hired, and I hired the best, the ones you used to destroy your competitors, agrees. The legal precedent is clear. Generational wealth building from marital assets remains marital property." Harrison Clark spoke up again. "There's actually case law now, thanks to Miss Freeman's lawyers. 3 separate federal judges have reviewed this prenuptial agreement and confirmed its validity. You made it so airtight that no court can break it, even to save you." Angel showed him a chart, his entire financial history mapped out like a family tree, every branch traceable back to those first 3 years with Brianna. "But the beautiful irony," Angel continued, "you were so paranoid about protecting your wealth that you never remarried with a prenup that could override this one. Your marriage to Claire? No prenup, which means half of what she didn't take in the divorce is also mine." Robert's mind reeled, trying to find a flaw in her logic, a crack in her plan. "The hidden accounts, all traceable to the original capital, the Cayman Islands account you just signed over. That was just theater for the press. I already owned it." She pulled out a Swiss bank statement. "The Zurich account you think no one knows about? Mine. The real estate holdings in Vancouver under shell companies? Mine. The art collection in the Frankfurt vault? Mine. How could you know about all of this?" Angel's smile was cold. "Because I've been preparing for 20 years. While you were building your empire, I was studying its blueprints. Every assistant you fired, every accountant you betrayed, every lawyer you cheated, they all talked to me eventually. I know about financial crimes you've forgotten you committed." She pulled out a tablet, showing a database. "Penelope Hart, your secretary from 1998 to 2003. She kept copies of everything. Marcus Chen, your CFO who you framed for embezzlement. He documented every illegal transaction you made him process. Julia Morrison, the forensic accountant you hired to hide assets from Claire, she made copies for me. 37 former employees, Robert, all with axes to grind, all with evidence to share." Morrison cleared his throat. "There's more. The FBI has been building a case based on the financial records Miss Freeman provided. The tax evasion alone could result in 20 years imprisonment. But with my cooperation, I could leverage—" "Leverage what?" Angel laughed. "You have nothing left to leverage. No money to hire lawyers, no connections who'll take your calls, no information that isn't already documented in the thousands of pages I've given the FBI." She stood, gathering her documents. "In 6 days, on my 21st birthday, I will officially become one of the wealthiest women in America. With your fortune, every penny you earned, every asset you acquired, every symbol of your success will bear my name. Or rather, my mother's name." "You can't erase me completely," Robert said desperately. "My name is on buildings, on contracts, in history." "Actually," Angel pulled out her phone, showing him a news article, "I've already begun the process of renaming everything. The Downey Financial Building is now the Brianna Freeman Center for Economic Justice. The Downey Fellowship at Harvard is now the Freeman Scholarship for first-generation students. The Downey Wing at the Metropolitan Museum. The Brianna Freeman Gallery of Contemporary Art." Each revelation was another blow, his legacy systematically erased and replaced with the name of the woman he'd discarded. "Your business autobiography is being pulled from shelves," Angel continued. "Replaced with a new edition that includes a final chapter I wrote about what happened after you abandoned us. Every business school that taught your case studies is now teaching the story of your downfall instead." She paused at the door, turning back one last time. "Oh, and that mansion you loved so much? I'm turning it into a shelter for abandoned mothers and their children. Your bedroom will house women who, like my mother, were thrown away by men who promised to love them." "Why?" Robert asked, his voice broken. "Why go this far?" Angel's expression softened for just a moment, and in that softness, Robert saw Brianna, the compassion that had made her love him despite his unworthiness. "Because my mother died at 43, believing she was a failure. She died thinking she hadn't given me enough, hadn't been enough. She died apologizing to me for not being able to provide better." Angel's voice cracked slightly. "She never knew that she was everything, that her love, her sacrifice, her strength were worth more than all your money combined." The softness vanished, replaced by steel. "You took her life, piece by piece, year by year. So I'm taking yours the same way, except you'll live to see it all disappear. You'll live to be forgotten. You'll live knowing that everything you built will serve the memory of the woman you destroyed." She left then, her heels clicking against the linoleum like a countdown. Harrison Clark lingered for a moment. "I kept a photo of Brianna from your wedding," the old lawyer said quietly. "She was radiant, full of hope. She loved you with her whole heart, Robert. And you threw her away like garbage." He shook his head. "I've seen a lot of cruel things in my career, but what you did to that girl, that was evil. Pure evil." Morrison packed up his papers, avoiding Robert's eyes. "The trial starts next month," Morrison said. "With the evidence Miss Freeman has provided, you're looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. You'll be in your 70s when you get out, if you get out." Alone in the consultation room, Robert stared at the prenuptial agreement that had destroyed him. His own signature at the bottom, bold and arrogant. He'd been so clever, so careful, so certain that he'd protected himself from any possible threat. He'd never imagined the threat would come from the child he'd never known, wielding the very weapons he'd created. He'd never imagined that his paranoid precision would become the instrument of his destruction. He'd never imagined that the woman he'd thrown away had raised a daughter brilliant enough to turn his own intelligence against him. In 6 days, Angel would legally own everything. But she already owned something worth more. She owned his destruction, authored with the same meticulous care he'd once used to destroy others, and unlike his victims, he would live to see every page of his story rewritten, every achievement erased, every legacy transformed into a monument to the woman he'd tried to forget. Chapter 9. The Final Demolition. The prison library was where Robert Downey learned about his complete erasure, surrounded by law books that couldn't save him and newspapers that celebrated his destruction. He'd been in federal custody for 3 months awaiting trial, his days blending into a grey routine of harsh lights and harder truths. His lawyer had stopped returning calls after Angel's 21st birthday, when the last of his assets officially transferred. There was no money left for appeals, no favours to call in, no hope to cling to. The guard, a young man named Thomas, who sometimes showed small kindnesses, brought him the New York Times. "Thought you should see this," he said, not unkindly. The headline read, "Angel Freeman becomes America's youngest black female billionaire on 21st birthday." Below it, a photograph of Angel at the ceremony, surrounded by dignitaries and celebrities, cutting a cake in what used to be Robert's boardroom. But it was the second article that destroyed him. Former billionaire Robert Downey's last ally abandons him. Everett Lawson, his partner of 15 years, his best man at both weddings, had given an exclusive interview. Robert read it with trembling hands. "I enabled Robert's cruelty for too long. I laughed when he mocked Brianna. I stayed silent when he destroyed families. I benefited from his ruthlessness, but Angel Freeman has shown me the cost of that complicity. I'm donating half my wealth to the Brianna Freeman Foundation as partial recompense for my role in her suffering." The betrayal should have stung, but Robert felt only numbness. Everyone had abandoned him now. Even his lawyer had officially withdrawn from the case, citing irreconcilable differences in legal strategy, code for a client with no money and no defense. Robert had tried writing letters, desperate attempts at connection or redemption. To his cousins in Boston, returned unopened. To his college roommate, returned with addressee unknown, though Robert knew the address was correct. To business associates across the country, all returned, refused, rejected. Angel had made him radioactive even through the mail. A commotion in the library made him look up. Inmates were gathering around the television, someone having switched from sports to the news. Angel's face filled the screen, standing at a podium outside what used to be Robert's mansion. "Today, we open the Brianna Freeman House," she announced. "A sanctuary for women and children escaping domestic abuse, abandonment, and economic violence. This 50-room mansion, which once symbolized the excess of cruel wealth, will now shelter those that such wealth typically exploits." The camera panned across the estate. Robert saw his former bedroom, now converted into a nursery. His private gym had become a children's playroom. His wine cellar was now a food pantry. His prized study, where he'd made deals that destroyed families, was now a therapy room for trauma counseling. Every trace of his presence had been scrubbed away, replaced with warmth and purpose. "We have our first resident moving in today," Angel continued, and the camera showed a young black woman, heavily pregnant, carrying a single suitcase. "Maria was abandoned by her husband last week when he learned she was expecting. Sound familiar?" The parallel was deliberate, cutting. The young woman looked directly at the camera. "Thank you, Miss Freeman. Thank you for giving me hope when I had none." Angel embraced her, and in that moment, Robert saw Brianna, not the broken woman he'd divorced, but the radiant girl he'd married, full of faith in humanity's goodness. Angel had inherited her mother's beauty, but weaponized it with a ruthlessness Brianna never possessed. The program shifted to a special segment, The Fall of Robert Downey, a timeline of justice. Former employees, business rivals, and social acquaintances lined up to denounce him. Each testimony was another nail in his coffin. "He fired my entire department the week before Christmas," one woman said. 43 people, just to improve his quarterly numbers. "He destroyed my father's company and laughed about it at a dinner party," a man testified. "Said it was just business while my father was having a heart attack from the stress. He seduced my wife to get information about my company's merger plans," another voice added, "then discarded her and destroyed both our lives." The program continued. Angel was converting all of Robert's former properties into community resources. His office building would become affordable housing. His country club was now a community center offering free job training. His art collection had been donated to public schools. His yacht had been converted into a marine education vessel for underprivileged children. "Every dollar Robert Downey accumulated through cruelty," Angel said, "will now serve kindness. Every building he raised on others' ruins will shelter those in need. Every symbol of his greed will become a monument to generosity." An inmate Robert recognized, Jerome Washington, a man imprisoned for a white-collar crime Robert had actually committed but framed him for, stood beside him. "She's thorough," Jerome observed. "Most people would have stopped at taking your money. She's erasing your entire existence. Even your crimes are being attributed to your victims now, giving them the credit for your few legitimate accomplishments while ensuring you're remembered only for the destruction." That evening, Robert was summoned to the visiting room. He expected no one, who was left, but found Angel waiting, impeccable in winter white, a color Brianna had loved but could never afford to wear. "Hello, Robert," she said, his name sounding foreign in her mouth. "I came to deliver something personally." She placed a worn journal on the table between them. Robert recognized Brianna's handwriting. Behind Angel stood a man with a camera, documenting this final meeting. "Her diary," Angel explained. "From the year after you divorced her, I thought you should read it. Consider it a parting gift." "Why would you?" "Because I want you to know exactly what you destroyed. Not the woman you discarded, but the woman who still loved you, despite everything. Read it. Understand the magnitude of your cruelty. This is being filmed for the final chapter of the documentary, The Man Who Had Everything and Valued Nothing." She left without another word. Robert opened the diary with shaking hands, Brianna's neat script transporting him back 20 years. December 26th. He filed the papers on Christmas Eve. "I haven't stopped crying. The baby moves inside me, and I wonder how I'll explain why Daddy doesn't want us." January 15th. Collapsed at work today. "The hospital says I'm malnourished. How do I choose between eating and prenatal vitamins? Robert would know. He always had answers. I miss his certainty." February 3rd. Felt the baby kick during my shift at the diner. I wanted to call Robert to share this miracle, then remembered he doesn't care. He never wanted this child, never wanted me. March 22nd. Saw Robert's engagement announcement in the paper. Claire Morrison, pharmaceutical heiress. "She's everything I'm not. Blonde, wealthy, connected. I hope she makes him happy. I still want him to be happy. Love doesn't just die, even when it should." April 10th. Angel was born today. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of perfection. When they asked for the father's name for the birth certificate, I said, "Unknown." The lie hurt more than labor. She has his eyes. Entry after entry, year after year, documenting her struggle and sacrifice. But what destroyed Robert wasn't the hardship. It was the love that persisted despite it. Brianna never stopped loving him, never stopped hoping he'd return, never stopped believing he was better than his actions. The final entry was dated a week before her death. Angel asked about her father again today. I told her he was a good man who lost his way. That wasn't a lie. The Robert I fell in love with was good. He laughed at my jokes, brought me books, held me when nightmares woke me. That man died somewhere between the wedding and the divorce. I mourn him still. I'm tired, so tired. The doctors say my heart is failing, but they're wrong. It failed 20 years ago. It's just taken this long to stop beating. If Robert ever reads this, and he won't, I want him to know, I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. For Angel's, hatred is too heavy to carry when you're already broken. I choose love. I always have. Robert closed the diary, tears streaming down his face. In 20 years of marriage to Claire, she'd never once told him she loved him. Their relationship had been a transaction, dissolved the moment the funds depleted. But Brianna, whom he'd given nothing but pain, had loved him until her last breath. The next morning, the final blow came via the prison television. Angel held another press conference, this time at Brianna's grave. The cemetery was packed with media from around the world. Robert Downey has been erased from public record, she announced. Every building, foundation, and fellowship bearing his name has been renamed. His business records have been sealed. His autobiography has been pulled and pulped. History will remember Brianna Freeman, the woman who raised a daughter strong enough to seek justice. Robert Downey will be forgotten, a footnote in her story rather than the protagonist of his own. She unveiled a new headstone for Brianna, carved from black marble with gold lettering, Brianna Freeman, beloved mother, unbroken spirit, forever loved. Her sacrifice built an empire of compassion. The revenge is complete, Mama. He's lost everything just as you did. But unlike you, he has no one to mourn him, no one to remember him with love. He'll die alone, forgotten, meaningless. The fate he condemned you to, now his own. As the cameras pulled back, Robert saw the full scope of the cemetery. Hundreds of people had gathered. Women Angel had helped. Children the foundation supported. Families given second chances with Robert's former wealth. They surrounded Brianna's grave like an army of the redeemed, proof that her sacrifice had meant something. The news anchor returned, holding a thick document. In a related development, Harvard Business School, Wharton and Stanford have all announced they're removing Robert Downey's case studies from their curricula, replacing them with the story of Angel Freeman's rise and her mother's sacrifice. The message to future business leaders is clear. Cruelty may build empires, but compassion builds legacies. That night, in his cell, Robert understood the perfection of Angel's revenge. She hadn't just taken his money or freedom, she'd taken his significance. He would serve his 20 years, emerge elderly and broken, and find a world that had forgotten he ever existed. No legacy, no impact, no mark upon the world except as a cautionary tale in his daughter's triumph. He lay on his narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling, and whispered into the darkness, "I'm sorry, Brianna. I'm so sorry." But apologies to the dead change nothing. Brianna was gone, her body broken by poverty and her heart by abandonment. Angel had inherited her mother's beauty and her father's brilliance, creating a synthesis that destroyed him. The destruction was complete. The man who had everything now had less than nothing. He had the knowledge of what he'd destroyed and the certainty that it could never be recovered. Chapter 10. The Complete Victory. The 20-year anniversary of Brianna Freeman's death arrived with spring rain, and the opening of the Brianna Freeman Memorial Museum, built on the site where Robert Downey's empire once stood. Angel Freeman, now 41 and one of the most powerful women in America, stood before a crowd of thousands. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp with promise. Behind her, the museum rose like a monument to transformation, every brick paid for with money that had once fueled cruelty, now serving commemoration. In the federal prison's common room, Robert Downey, 72 and broken, watched the ceremony on television. 20 years of incarceration had carved gullies in his face and stolen the arrogance from his spine. His hands, once soft from privilege, now bore the calluses of 2 decades of prison labor. "The museum houses my mother's complete story," Angel addressed the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had reshaped the world through will alone. Not just her suffering, but her joy. Not just her abandonment, but her strength. Not just her death, but her life. The camera toured the museum. The first room displayed Brianna's childhood, report cards showing straight A's, art projects revealing early talent, photographs of a girl unburdened by the poverty that would later define her. The second room held her dreams, acceptance letters to colleges she couldn't afford, sketches of wedding dresses she'd designed, journals full of poetry and hope. Then came the room Robert couldn't bear to watch, their courtship. Photographs he'd forgotten existed, love letters he'd written when he still knew how to love, the receipt from their first date, which Brianna had kept, the pressed flowers from the bouquet he'd brought when proposing. "She loved him completely," Angel narrated, her voice clinical now, discussing the past like a surgeon describing a tumor. Despite everyone's warnings, despite the prenuptial agreement, despite the red flags, she believed love could conquer difference. She was wrong. The next rooms documented the destruction. The divorce papers displayed like evidence of a crime. Photographs of Brianna working her 3 jobs. Medical records showing her declining health. Angel's birth certificate with the father's name left blank. The uncashed check Robert had thrown at her, now framed with a placard. The price of a life, $20,000. But the museum didn't end with suffering. The final rooms celebrated resurrection, Angel's achievements, the thousands of women helped by the foundation, the children educated with scholarship funds, the families housed in former luxury properties. Brianna's death had become a catalyst for systematic change. "My mother died believing she was worthless," Angel said, addressing the camera directly, knowing Robert would be watching. "She died thinking she had failed, but her life, her sacrifice created this. Every woman we've helped, every child we've educated, every family we've sheltered exists because she existed, because she loved, because she endured." The crowd applauded, but Angel raised her hand for silence. "There's one more room in the museum, one I've kept private until today." She led the cameras to a small, windowless chamber at the museum's heart. The walls were covered with photographs, not of Brianna, but of Robert. His rise and fall documented in meticulous detail, his mansions becoming shelters, his offices becoming clinics, his wealth becoming charity, and at the center a single placard, Robert Matthew Downey, 1952 forgotten. A cautionary tale of how greed destroys the greedy. Father to Angel Freeman, though he never claimed her. Husband to Brianna Freeman, though he abandoned her. He had everything and valued nothing. Now he is nothing, as he always was. "This room will remain sealed after today," Angel announced. "Robert Downey doesn't deserve remembrance, even as a warning. He will be erased from history, present only in the absence he created. The father who wasn't there, the husband who didn't stay, the man who chose wealth over love and ended with neither." She produced a key, ornate and final. "I'm locking this room forever. Robert Downey dies today, not his body, which will continue its meaningless existence, but any trace of his significance. He is unmade, uncreated, undone." The door closed with a definitive click. The key was handed to Dorothy Freeman, Brianna's mother, now 93 and wheelchaired, but still dignified. "My daughter is immortal now," Dorothy said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "And the man who killed her is less than dead. He's forgotten." The ceremony continued outside. A gospel choir sang Brianna's favorite hymn. Children from the Foundation's schools released butterflies. Brianna had loved butterflies, seeing transformation in their wings. The mayor announced that the date would officially become Brianna Freeman Day in New York City. In the prison, Robert watched it all, his destruction complete and public. The other inmates had stopped speaking to him years ago, his story too toxic even for criminals. He was solitary even in company, ghosted even among the condemned. A guard approached, not Thomas, who had retired, but a young woman named Angela. The name was coincidence, but it twisted the knife deeper. "Downey, you have a visitor." Robert couldn't imagine who. He hadn't had a visitor in 5 years, not since his mother had died, disinheriting him with her last breath. But he followed. Hope, a stupid thing that refused to die even after decades of disappointment. The visitor was a young woman, early 20s, beautiful in a way that reminded him painfully of Brianna. She introduced herself as Hope Freeman, Angel's daughter. "My mother doesn't know I'm here," Hope said, studying Robert with curious eyes. "I wanted to see you for myself, the man who destroyed my grandmother." Robert said nothing. What was there to say? "I'm getting married next month," Hope continued, "to a wonderful man who owns nothing but loves everything. My mother warned me against it, said love without security is dangerous. But I think she's wrong. I think love is the only security." She pulled out a photograph, herself in a wedding dress, simple but elegant, standing beside a young man whose eyes held the same devotion Robert's once had, before wealth poisoned him. "My grandmother would have loved him," Hope said. "She would have loved knowing that her sacrifice created this, me, free to choose love over money because her daughter ensured I'd never have to choose between them." She stood to leave, then paused. "You're invited to the wedding, not as a guest. You'll watch from the prison television. But I want you to see what you missed, what you could have had if you'd chosen differently." The wedding was broadcast nationally. Angel Freeman's daughter marrying for love, the billionaire heiress choosing a teacher with nothing but devotion to offer. The media called it the wedding of the century, proof that love could transcend wealth. Robert watched from his cell as Angel walked Hope down the aisle. The walk he should have taken, the role he'd forfeited. He watched Angel's speech about her mother, how Brianna had taught her that love was the only wealth that mattered, even when it was all she had to give. The reception was held at the Brianna Freeman Memorial Museum. The couple's first dance was to a song Brianna had hummed while cleaning, a hymn about redemption and grace, things Robert would never receive. As the broadcast ended, Robert understood the final cruelty of Angel's revenge. She hadn't just taken his wealth, his freedom, his legacy. She had created a parallel universe of what could have been, a granddaughter he'd never know, a family he'd never claim, a love he'd never experience. She had built heaven from his hell and locked him outside to watch. That night, as every night for his remaining years, Robert would lie in his cell and count his losses like a rosary of regret. Brianna, dead at 43. Angel, brilliant and unreachable. Hope, beautiful and unknown, the family he'd traded for money that no longer existed. Outside the prison walls, the Freeman Foundation continued its work. The Brianna Freeman Memorial Museum welcomed thousands daily. Angel Freeman's empire grew, built on the bones of his own, and somewhere, in whatever afterlife awaited, Brianna Freeman finally rested, her sacrifice complete, her daughter's revenge achieved, her name immortal, while his faded into the nothing he had always been. The rain returned that night, washing the city clean. In the morning, there would be no trace of Robert Downey left in the world he'd once ruled. Angel had erased him so completely that even his destruction would be forgotten, leaving only Brianna's memory and the empire of love built on the ruins of greed. The victory was complete. The daughter had avenged the mother, and Robert Downey, once master of the universe, died a little more each day in a cell that would hold him until his body caught up with his significance, already buried, already gone, already nothing. The story ended where it began, with a powerful person walking through doors that had once belonged to Robert Downey. But now those doors bore Brianna Freeman's name, and they would forever.